Sue Dickman. I'm the CEO and Executive Vice President of the Jewish Communal Fund, and I want to thank you all for joining us on this webinar. It's a pleasure to greet JCF donors, their friends, and guests from JFN. We have a very distinguished panel, and we're looking forward to hearing from all of our speakers and engaging in a robust conversation on metrics and evaluating charities. Before we begin, I just want to say a few words about JCF. We are the largest Jewish donor-advised fund in the country, and we have charitable assets of over $1.5 billion. And Ellen is just going to continue on JCF.
Okay. Yes, Jewish Communal Fund, of course, has been managing philanthropy for 4 decades. We're currently, as many people know, managing for 4,000 different funds, and our donors are funding in every single category. And we're very proud to say that last year, over 40,000 grants came out from Jewish Communal Fund, constituting about $350 million that went out into all aspects of the charitable sector. And one of the things we're extremely committed to is to help our donors continue on this trajectory, but doing so in the most educated and effective way. And our partnership with Jewish Funders Network is really giving us increased depth and resources to provide this type of education, and we're very grateful to them for helping us put together a marvelous group of speakers. And before I turn it over to our moderator, Wendy, who will introduce our distinguished panel, I wanted to give you a little background about her. Wendy is the founder and principal of Rosov Consulting. She serves as a senior level consultant to individual philanthropists, community and family foundations, and Jewish communal organizations. She is a sought-after expert on program design and evaluation. Wendy holds a PhD in education from Stanford University and an MA in Jewish education from the University of Judaism and a BA from Barnard College, Columbia University. She is an alumna of the Wexner Graduate Fellowship Program. And Wendy, we turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I'm really, really pleased to be here with you this morning from the soggy and soaked Bay Area. For those of you who've been watching the weather and or living through it, it's been quite intense here. I'm really, really especially pleased to be here with 3 wonderful colleagues, Mirele Goldsmith, who is an independent evaluator based in the New York area. And for those of you in the New York area and connected to folks in the Jewish Funders Network as well as the Jewish Communal Fund probably know her. Jim Heeger is active at the board level on many, many different levels, mostly, most importantly, Moishe House. He has been involved in chairing philanthropic strategy at the San Francisco Federation. He's very involved in URJ Camp Newman, treasurer of the Foundation for Jewish Camp, etc. Just has a long list of great accomplishments and commitments in the Jewish communal sector. And Rella Kaplowitz, who's the program officer for evaluation and learning at the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation based in Washington, D.C. Rella occupies a rare position in the Jewish philanthropic world, and one perhaps that after you hear from her today, some of you might be thinking we need more of. But she'll certainly be talking about some of the great work that the Schusterman Family Foundation has been doing in this area. I do want to say that I'm going to go ahead and turn over the baton here, I believe, to Mirele first. And she's going to speak for about 5 or so minutes. Then we're going to move on to Rella and then to Jim. And then I will pose some questions to this distinguished panel. During this entire time, if you like, you should see a chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen if you are online watching the slides go by and part of this presentation. You can feel free at any point to type in questions, and we will try to take a look at those as we move through this presentation. If I can ask Mirele to move to the next slide, that would be great. Actually, I can do that. I'm sorry. This is actually the first person that's going to go is Rella. So I'm going to turn it over to Rella Kaplowitz at the Schusterman Family Foundation. Go ahead, Rella.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel, and I look forward to a great conversation. I just wanted to share a little bit about my role. Wendy mentioned I operate in an interesting space in the philanthropic sector in that a large part of my role is capacity building, specifically in the realm of data, performance, and evaluation with our grantees and partners. And you may have seen that the Schusterman Foundation recently published the data playbook, which is really the culmination of a lot of the technical assistance that I've been providing over the last couple of years. And I just wanted to share a little bit about sort of the guiding principles that the Schusterman Foundation has when we think about data, metrics, and evaluation and philanthropy. I'll say that those are sort of all words: data, metrics, evaluation, all words that talk about, how we get information that we need to make good decisions, to do our jobs well, and to really achieve the impact that we want to see. And so, we at the foundation have a big picture view, a big learning strategy. It's not just about this evaluation or that evaluation. As an organization, we want to know writ large, from the very small to the very big, are we achieving what we want to achieve as a foundation? And if we're not, how can we tweak things to make sure that we're getting there? And in thinking about using metrics in philanthropy, we sort of have 4 major guiding principles. One of them is clarity. Always make sure, and when you're doing anything with metrics or with data, you need to clarify why you want the information. Why do you want that data? What questions will it help you answer? What decisions will it help you make? And that will just make you, it'll make it a lot easier to figure out what information you should be collecting. You could collect tons of information that doesn't actually help you make decisions. And then, you've expended a lot of effort to collect data, both for yourself, and then also you've tasked your grantees potentially to collect a lot of information that actually isn't as helpful as you might have thought. So clarity in what data you need, what information you need at the outset is really important. The second thing is standardizing. This is really helpful for both the grant maker and the grantee for 2 reasons. One, grantees always give you better information when they know what to expect, and if they've been collecting that information all along. So it's great to be upfront and let people know, these are the types of things that I'm going to want information about, and on this regular basis. And the second thing is, if you ask multiple grantees, multiple partners, the same questions and collect the same information, it really gives you the ability to look across portfolios, across different programs, across different funding streams, and maybe gain more information because you've asked the same questions from your grantees. The third guiding principle is centralizing. There have been a bunch of studies that have come out recently that one of the big challenges to using data, metrics, and evaluation to make better decisions is that the information lives in so many different places. Many foundation professionals and nonprofit professionals often don't even know what data they have at their fingertips. And because of that, they're just not able to make the types of decisions that they could if the information was all in one place. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to build a huge, massive database to store all of that information, but it does mean that minimizing the number of places that you're storing data can be really helpful in the long run. And the fourth is iterate. Building data capacity is a process. It can sometimes be a frustrating process. There's culture change that's required. There's skill building that's required. There are mindset shifts that are required. And it takes time. I've been at the foundation for about 2.5 years, and it's a process. And I think that, starting small, really small ways to just step up a little bit the way that you're that you're collecting data, standardize a little bit what you're asking for from your grantees, bring one small data point to a meeting, small shifts, testing, iterating. You'll find things along the way that don't work. That'll just, I think, really help organizations move to a place where, data is more part of the culture.
Thank you so much, Rella. That was a terrific summary there and very, very clear. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Mirele Goldsmith, who's going to talk a little bit about what she calls the evaluation buffet.
Thank you very much for having me on this webinar. It's really an honor to speak to the group. I'm going to give you an overview of some of the choices that you can make as funders and some of the choices you really have to make if you want to get involved in program evaluation. And what I'm going to share with you has emerged from my work with many funders, both large and small, I want to emphasize, over the years, and completing about 60 evaluation projects, most of them inspired and paid for and asked for by funders. And I have turned what I've learned into a workshop and a course that I call How to Be an Informed Consumer About Evaluation, because I really think that you as funders are the ones who really have to understand evaluation so that you can get the information that you want out of it and help your grantees to provide you with that. So let's talk a little bit about what is program evaluation. Program evaluation is an ongoing process to achieve organizational effectiveness by asking good questions, systematically collecting information, sharing information, and making decisions. I emphasize that evaluation alone doesn't make decisions for you. It doesn't really answer the questions that you may have about where to put your money, how to best achieve your goals. But what it can do is it can inform that decision making so that you're making better decisions. And as Rella emphasized, the most important thing first to think about is what is the decision that you want to make? And then work backwards from that to what is the information that you need. You need to really select the meaningful question because you can never collect all the information that is possible, that's possible to collect out there. The example I use in my workshops is actually the Million Man March. Some of you may remember back to then, and a controversy broke out after that march about just how many people were there. And what we explore in the workshop is, was that really even the right question to ask? By calling the march the Million Man March, everyone got distracted by the name and thought that the goal was 1 million people there. But actually the goal was to change communities and to get people more involved in working in their communities, parenting, changing policy in Washington. That's why the march was in Washington. So the first thing is to really ask, what are your questions? And then you know what kind of data to go after. It's also about sharing information. I think this is very important also for funders to recognize. When you collect information and you learn things, you can share it with others. One of the early projects that I did was with an organization called the Jewish Connection Partnership, which was funding a number of projects around the country to do outreach to Jews who are unaffiliated and uninvolved in the community. And by studying that group of programs, we were able to discern a cycle in the outreach process and to help these various organizations understand where they fit into that cycle. That became an educational tool that we were able to share with many organizations and that helped people in the field to do their work. So it's not just about collecting the information, it's also about sharing it and helping other people to make better decisions using it. Believe it or not, we try to make evaluation fun. This is from a series of cartoons that you can find on the internet. As an evaluator, this is exactly what happens. Often people come to me at the end of a project and they say, we need an evaluation. What's it supposed to be about? It's very important, as Rella said, if you can be clear with your grantees at the beginning, they can help you by collecting the information along the way. And if you're clear about what you need to know, you can design better evaluation. The metaphor that I like to use is the buffet. When you first take a look at program evaluation, you can see that there's really an overwhelming number of choices, but you can break it down to a series of pretty direct questions. The first is, are you really talking about monitoring or evaluation? All of you probably are engaged in monitoring activities like requiring reports from your grantees or doing site visits. Perhaps your project doesn't really need a deep program evaluation. Perhaps monitoring is enough. The second question is, what is really the subject of your evaluation? Is it a single grant? Is it a program for which you may be only providing part of the funding? Is it a group of programs that work together? And one tip to keep in mind is you often learn a lot more from an evaluation when you can compare programs to each other. The third question is, what is the purpose of this evaluation? Is it to test, to understand what's going on in the test of a new program or a pilot program? Is it to improve a program that's been going on for a long time? Is it to document a program so that it can then be replicated? If you can understand the purpose, that will also help you to make better decisions about the program. The fourth question is, what evaluation approach do you want to use? There are so many approaches out there. Just to give you an example of something that might be different than you would usually consider, I recently integrated into an evaluation about a professional development program an approach called the most significant change approach. So instead of using surveys or interviews, in this approach we collect stories from the participants about what's the most significant change that happened for them because of the program. And then we actually engage the participants in analyzing those stories and helping us to understand which of them are most important, which of them really capture the outcomes from the program. Right now what I'm talking to you about is based on the utilization-focused approach to evaluation, which was developed by Michael Quinn Patton. And in a good tradition, Jewish tradition, I like to always give him credit, b'shem omro. I always like to say that. I learned so much from him, and this is a picture of when I met him at the American Evaluation Association, which is our professional association as program evaluators, and it's also a great resource for you for more information about evaluation. Finally, I'd just like to encourage you to take the opportunity to taste different things on the evaluation buffet. Don't rush to fill your plate. Recognize that program evaluation is a significant commitment. It's not a quick fix. And take the opportunity to build trust with your grantees before you make decisions about what direction you'd like to go in.
Thank you, Rella. Really, really appreciate it. Jim, I'm going to turn the baton over to you, and you'll be speaking from a different perspective yet again.
Yes, thank you, and thanks to our friends at the Jewish Communal Fund and Jewish Funders Network for hosting us today. At Moishe House, we are focused on young adults 22 to 30, post-college age. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Moishe House, the model is essentially that 3 to 5 young Jewish adults will get together and create a Moishe House, live together in a home together, and do 5 to 7 creative Jewish programs each month for their network of friends. So we're using the social networks of the young adults to create communities of young people, and we do that in over 95 houses, and now in 22 countries around the world. In 2016, we touched 45,000 unique individuals, and we celebrated our 10th year. So it's a program that has grown quickly, dramatically under the leadership of David Siegelman, our founder, and one of the, as we've turned to our 10th year and started thinking about the impact that we've had, the question has been what mark are we leaving? What mark is Moishe House leaving on the broader Jewish world? And we're now at the point where we're starting to see the alumni of our programs in various other aspects of the Jewish world. So one of the things that I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes on the evaluations that we do around the program effectiveness. We've decided to do a major program evaluation every 3 to 4 years. And the first one we worked with PCC on, and the second one that we did a year or so ago, a little over a year ago, with Informing Change. And we do these every 3 to 4 years, and we're really targeting 3 different audiences. We target our residents. There are a few hundred residents among 95 houses with 3 to 4 people each. We've got the residents who tend to be very involved, very engaged, and are leading. They're leaders in their own right in the Jewish world. Participants, of which we have tens of thousands, and I mentioned that we touched 45,000 unique individuals last year. Total program participation was on the order of 120,000 last year. And alumni, which are in the thousands now, alumni of the houses, the residents who are now out doing other things in the Jewish world. So a couple of the key findings that we've learned over the years. I think one of them, a couple of things we were trying to learn was about the leadership, Jewish leadership, and have we changed sort of the model of Jewish leadership, and have we changed the perception of the participants in terms of their own Jewish leadership? And not surprisingly, by participating in Moishe House, there was a substantial increase in how people see themselves as Jewish leaders, from 20% to 90%. But one of the interesting things that we learned was about sort of the grounding that people had in their Jewish heritage and in their ability to lead in the Jewish community. And initially, the responses about, around do people have the confidence, do our residents and our participants have the confidence to lead in the Jewish community? Initially, it was very low. The responses were very low, and there was a lot of people that were coming and participating but didn't feel like they could lead it on their own. And this led to us actually, this to me is the kind of evaluation that is most valuable because it leads to action. And so in this case, we were able to take that and develop what we call learning retreats. And we have developed a series of learning retreats that we invite residents and participants of Moishe House to around the country and around the world, where they can come and learn more about Jewish ritual observance or other aspects of Jewish learning. We work with several partners, including the Maimonides Fund, to do these learning retreats, and 80% now report that they can lead content-rich Jewish experiences. So for me, this is a great example of what we were talking about earlier, with respect to knowing what you're trying to, what questions you're trying to answer as you go into these, because you want to be able to take the data and use it to enhance the program and to take what you're doing to sort of a new level. So I just thought this was at least one example that could kind of ground maybe a little bit of our discussion. With that, I will turn it back to Wendy.
Great. Thank you so much. What a terrific presentation from the three of you, from Mirele, Rella, and Jim. I just want to highlight a couple things that were said across the three of them, and then I'm going to pose a couple of questions to the panel. And I see that there's at least one question that's come through from some of you who are on the phone here and listening in. I do want to reiterate this question of being clear about what the purpose of any evaluative activities that you might undertake and which Rella mentioned, the clarity in what information you need, which Rella mentioned, and importantly, what Jim just mentioned, which is what are you going to do with that information once you actually get it, if you can get it, and once you get it. And so Jim gave a great example of a new programmatic sort of strand of Moishe House, these learning retreats. So a real clear sense of these evaluative data led them to make a programmatic shift or addition. So being really clear about what it is you're going to do with the information once you get it. The second thing I just wanted to accentuate before I pose my questions to the panel is, and I can't accentuate this enough, really building trust with your grantees around data gathering, evaluation, et cetera. Evaluation can be a scary word. And in the work that we do day in and day out at the nexus of funders and grantees around questions of what constitutes success, how will you know, when will you know, by what means will you establish an answer to that question, that can be a scary proposition for a grantee. There is a power dynamic between funder and grantee, and I think that sense of relationship, of trust that some of our panelists mentioned is really, really critical. I want to throw out a first question to the panelists, and you can feel free, any of you, to answer this. We heard the word data used, and we heard the word evaluation used. What would you say is the difference between those things? I want folks on the phone to be able to get a little bit clearer about basic or descriptive data that's more about outputs, and perhaps evaluative data that's more about program implementation and or outcomes. Can someone speak to that, please?
I'd like to just start out. Can you hear me? This is Mirele.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I'd like to just start out by sort of saying to the audience that there's a lot of jargon in the evaluation field. And one of the things that I always urge people to do is when you hear anyone use one of these terms, ask them what they mean by it, because even if I define it for you today, someone else might mean something different about it. Data really is just very simply information. Evaluation is the process of, as I described before, collecting information in a systematic way and using it to make good decisions. So those are very basic definitions, but of course people will use them in different ways.
Yeah, Wendy, it's Jim. One of the things that, I think as I was talking with, David Siegelman about some of these, questions, we collect a lot of data, on a regular basis, but unlike financial data that there's sort of a right and wrong answer, a right or wrong way to book it or to interpret it. When we get into evaluation and impact, there aren't so many rules. We talked about sort of maybe best practices here this morning, but there aren't a lot of rules. And one of the challenges, for Moishe House in particular, I think, is as we think about sort of relative to other things, that funders could be doing, what are the definitions of engagement? What does it mean to engage 45,000 unique individuals? And I think Rella talked about sort of shared definitions among organizations, and I think that there's real potential for improvement, because somebody could do 100 programs with 10 people at them that are really very different from another organization that's doing 10 programs with 100 people, or one giant concert with 1,000 people. And everybody might claim that they engaged 1,000 people there, but understanding sort of the relative volume, I guess numbers don't tell the whole story, and trying to get a qualitative perspective on the impact as well as sort of quantitative is one of the challenges I know that we're sort of wrestling with all the time because we run a variety of different types of programs.
Good. I'm going to jump in, Rella. I'm going to preempt you here on the response to this, just because there was a question from some folks about what are the costs of doing this kind of evaluation work that folks have been talking about. How do you balance those against the benefits? I want to just ask a question related to what Jim was talking about, and this question of outputs. Someone else wrote about, we've been talking a lot about sort of counting, but what about impact? What are some examples of times when metrics were misleading or didn't provide the information that you actually sought? What are sort of the limits of data collection, of evaluation? Where might we miss the boat sometimes in this work?
Well, this is Mirele. One of the things I would say is there's a lot of emphasis today on talking about outcomes. Outcomes are the change caused by a program. And one of the things that we've learned as evaluators is that if you only collect information about the outcomes, even if you have tried to look at them in terms of a change and not just looking at the outputs, so that would be how many people have come and what have they have done and so on, that you can come to the end of an evaluation and really not know how or why those outcomes were achieved or not achieved. So it's very important to balance your data collection activities or what kind of information you're collecting to also look at what's happening in the program. And sometimes you can do that by things that are quantitative, so collecting information that can be expressed in numbers. But sometimes it's really helpful to be looking at things that aren't so easy to quantify. So that may be up to observing the program, through talking with people, using all the different techniques that we have for talking with people, so that we really understand what's going on in the program and we can make the link and help people to understand how to improve the program, what kind of changes are needed, so we can make the link between what's happening in the program and what the outcomes are that we're seeing in perhaps more quantitative way.
I think another important thing to consider, and I think this speaks to the questions about, how much does it cost, how do you balance that, is the cost of an evaluation should never be more than the value the evaluation results will provide to you as an organization. And that is to say, for a very small grant, for a very small short-term program, you probably don't need to invest in a huge evaluation, nor should you be asking the grantee to invest in a huge evaluation. Because a couple of post-program survey questions may get you the information that you need to let you know enough, did this program have the intended impact? It was a small grant. So I think in thinking about, how much you should be investing in evaluation, and I'm a big proponent of if funders are asking grantees to invest in evaluation, then we should be helping to support it. But we should, I think, not overburden grantees when it comes to requesting data or evaluation activities if the size of the grant either really isn't enough to support an evaluation itself, or the amount of time, effort, money that it would require to receive the answers to your questions is more than how much you've invested in the program itself.
Yep, it's a great point, Rella. We call that in our business, not shooting a mouse with an elephant gun. So I appreciate the comment there. There's a question from one of our listeners here asking about, for smaller foundations who perhaps can't do in-depth surveys or evaluations, in other words, retain the services of an outside professional evaluator. That, of course, you've got your sort of mid-year and end-of-year grantee reports. Are you suggesting here, this is a question to the panelists, that perhaps those requests for mid and end-year reports use the same framework and questions in order to have consistency across a grant portfolio and something of that nature. And I think, Rella, you spoke a little bit about that notion of standardization. So perhaps you could say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that is a phenomenal idea. That's something that we do at the Schusterman Foundation. So we build into all of our grant requirements, because it's a time when our grantees are communicating with us anyway. We ask them the same questions each time there's a particular grant report due. So we say, these were the goals of the grant. How are you doing? Do you think you're on track to achieve them? And obviously we ask also some financial questions and other due diligence questions. And we always ask them the same questions, and we always ask all of our grantees the same questions, which kind of goes back to what I was saying before. It makes it easier for them to know what information they should be collecting on an ongoing basis so they can report to us in the way that we want them to. And then it also makes it easier for us from a foundation perspective to be able to look across different grants. The other thing I'll say is that outside of general grant reporting, we also as a foundation have certain specific strategic questions that we need to ask at any given time. And so we've also built in certain questions, like twice a year we do a survey that asks specifically for participant engagement numbers. And to Jim's point earlier, we've worked very hard on clarifying exactly what engagement means when we're asking them for that information, so that we are not counting sort of a 1-hour participation as much as a 10-day program. But I think that's a great idea. I mean, building in opportunities to collect information from your grantees on an ongoing basis when you're already in communication with them is a great way to both reduce the burden on them so they don't have to do an additional task on top of something else, and also just gives you a regular opportunity to be able to have information and look at it on a grant-by-grant basis, and also from a little bit of a bigger perspective. If you have a couple of strategic portfolios that have several grants in them, it'll give you a good chance to sort of look at that across grants as well.
Wendy, can I jump in there?
Absolutely.
I'm very appreciative of the work that particularly the Schusterman Foundation is doing in terms of trying to standardize some of this data collection and reporting. I think one of the challenges for the organizations themselves is that because they deal with several, typically, or at least we deal with several large funders, they all have sort of their own models that they're working with. And so one of the opportunities I think for this greater space that maybe groups like JFN could help with would be to be standardizing some of the ways we do this, both across, not just across within a foundation, but across foundations, because I think it would make it would streamline some of the work that the organizations themselves have to do when they're responding to lots of different major foundations. And I'm encouraged because I think when you look at some of the work like the teen, the work that Jim Joseph's leading with the teen initiative, across 10 different communities, large communities around the country. They've engaged, there's a funder collective there. There's multiple funders, and they're building, a standard process for sort of looking at 10 very different programs. So I think it's an opportunity, if we're looking at something for this space as a whole, to sort of work on. It feels to me like there's opportunities there for that potentially.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Yep, Mirele, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in as well that these are all really important points, that you should talk to your grantees and find out what they're already doing in evaluation and what they want to do. I think the question was posed from the point of view of smaller foundations, but also smaller grantees, may have basic questions that they want to answer and that will also answer your questions too, and they may be interested in doing evaluation internally. I've worked with several foundations that provided small grants for their grantees to have some evaluation coaching, just to help them build their own internal capacity to do evaluation. Sometimes this can be really on a very volunteer-led basic level. I'm thinking of one project that I worked on with the Jewish Meditation Center, where we trained some of the volunteers, some of the members of the organization to conduct interviews with each other. And they were able to do the interviews, type in the transcripts right into a computer program, so it was online. And then a few volunteers met together and analyzed the data, and they were able to really extract very useful information that they could also report to their funders. So building up that internal evaluation capacity can also be a direction to go in if you don't have the funds or the need to do outside evaluation.
Great. Mirele, that's very helpful. And I can say from our work at Rosov Consulting, we've seen a number of, on the larger funder side, we've seen some capacity building grants given to organizations that are moving into sort of second stage or mezzanine level work where they're having an opportunity to build their evaluation capacity so that they can do more and more of this work internally. And I think that's a great investment of philanthropic dollars. I did want to just pick up on something Jim said before going on to another couple questions that have come in from the listeners. That more and more we see different philanthropists, different foundations getting together, either getting together on the front end and or just de facto funding an organization or a group of organizations. So you've got a particular organization doing a program, and they're getting funding from multiple sources, and they're being asked by each of those sources to report in this way or in that way or in the next way, and that's very, very taxing on the organization. So I think Jim's comment about both talking to your grantee but also talking to other funders who might be in the same space with that grantee as you or set of grantees as you to understand, well, what information are they asking for, and to help the organization not have to be, sort of under the weight of being asked to report in many different ways, in many different formats, different kinds of information. I think we have a really important question here from Stephen Cohen, and this is a question that we deal with all the time in my firm. To what extent are the methods and results of evaluation work made available to the research and philanthropic publics at large? A lot of the evaluation work that goes on is proprietary in nature. It's not necessarily shared out. Some of it isn't necessarily, there's no warrant to share it out. It may be something very small or more formative in nature, meaning just to sort of learn some things along the way. But some of the larger sort of impact evaluations or outcomes-based evaluations that we've been talking about, some of those never see the light of day. Comments from the panelists about this issue?
Yeah, I would say that I will tell you, I think the best example of an impact study that I think is out in sort of the public domain is what the Foundation for Jewish Camp uses around why camp works. And there have been multiple studies actually over the years about why Jewish summer camping works, and I think they've been very good about publishing that and making it available. I don't think, as I think about Moishe House, I'm not sure that Moishe House would necessarily have any issue with sharing the information. I'm not sure it occurred to us to put it, sort of out there. I do think there is some reticence on the part of different organizations. We talked about trust earlier between the funder and the organization, but there's also issues about sort of sharing, the things that maybe aren't going so well, and so how to do that in an environment where you don't sort of get trashed for the things that maybe you need to work on. So I don't know. It's probably I have to think about that one, but it feels like it would be there's pluses and minuses to sort of making that stuff more public.
Mm-hmm. Other panelists want to respond to that? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Rella, go ahead.
Sure. I was going to say that I think part of the problem and why there's a reticence into sharing things publicly is that a lot of times people think of evaluation as a tool for a go, no-go funding decision as opposed to a tool for learning. And just because it appears that something is not achieving the outcomes it was supposed to doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or a bad thing. But very often, I think organizations are hesitant to conduct or to share evaluation because they're concerned about losing funding or how it might appear to the broader sector. And so I think generally, we need to work more on, evaluation being part of a broader learning strategy, that we're learning organizations. Not everything is going to work all the time, and sometimes things just aren't going to work, and we have to be okay with that too. So just wanted to put that out there.
Mirele, did you want to comment on that?
I'd love to comment on this. And first of all, I want to thank Stephen Cohen for the question. If that's the Stephen Cohen who directs the Berman Jewish Policy Archive, because you've really helped to make a lot of this information available more publicly. As an evaluator who's done a lot of work in the Jewish world with programs that are similar, this is a big frustration for me because I may do an evaluation and learn a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and then I go to evaluate the next program, and they haven't had the opportunity to learn from what was done before. And it's really a shame. So I encourage all of you to be more, brave and let those evaluation reports be shared so that everybody can learn from them. Also, I think that, Wendy, I wouldn't qualify to say it's only those large, impact evaluations that are more definitive that should be shared, because often those formative evaluations, the evaluations of those pilot programs that were funded for a couple of years, and then the program lost the funding so it didn't continue, that's still information that other people can learn from without having to reinvent the wheel. And finally, I just want to say, as a professional evaluator and a longtime member of the American Evaluation Association, our association has guiding principles that we are supposed to follow as professionals. They're not legal requirements, such the kind of thing that lawyers have or accountants have to work in the public interest, but as a profession, we've established those kind of guidelines because we see our profession as working in the public interest, and not only in the interest of the funder or the organization, whether it's the grantee or the funder, who paid for the evaluation. We see ourselves as helping to add to the public good. And one of those guiding principles is that the results of evaluation should be made available to the public, to anyone who can benefit from them, to anyone who's a stakeholder, certainly, which includes the beneficiaries of the programs. Unfortunately, I think that very often we're not able to follow through on that. But I really encourage all of you to think about that deeply. How can you allow others to make use of what you have learned through this evaluation work?
Great. Wonderful. We have a question about, this may get into the sort of the technicality in the weeds a little bit here, but perhaps folks can talk to it. I'm going to slightly tweak the question. It gets to the question of, when you have a program with either a few participants, meaning, not 50 or 100 or thousands, as is in the case of Moishe House, and you're dealing with data where you're not necessarily able to establish some type of statistical, threshold for talking about, for talking about change, for talking about impact. How do you think about that? I mean, how do you think about these questions of causation versus correlation, meaning, not necessarily being able to say that this program caused these kinds of things, but we're seeing some relationship between X and Y, especially when we're talking about sort of smaller programs. No takers on that one.
I'll speak to it. This is Rella. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we say that we're not willing to accept results that don't imply causation. Causation is really, really tough. And given that there are, I mean, unless you're planning to do sort of a lab, scientific study,
right.
Especially in the social science realm when we're talking about things like increasing Jewish identity, fuzzy, kind of hard to measure things sometimes. I just think causation is not where it's at. I think you need to start talking about contribution. And even if you have a very small group of individuals, okay, maybe you're not going to publish a scientific study in a journal about the impact that a particular program had, but if you ask for 10 participants from our program a couple of questions to see whether or not there was some change after they participated in a program, that still gives you more information than you had before. And I think that increasingly there has been a really big push on hard quantitative data, in some ways doing a disservice to really important qualitative data, the stories, the narrative, the anecdotes. Both quantitative and qualitative data are really important for decision making. And just because you're not going to have sort of some scientifically validated scale to measure a change in something particular, you're still going to have more information than you had before.
Great. Anyone else want to comment on that? And I have something to say about this. No, Mirele or Jim. I mean, what I can't agree with Rella more, and what I would say is that, we ask, Mirele talked about her questions, around evaluation when she was doing her presentation. And, we typically ask our clients, 4 questions. It's very sort of Jewish notion there when they're thinking about undertaking some type of evaluation work or evaluative activity. Who are the audiences for the evaluation? In other words, who's curious, who's going to read this stuff, who's going to look at it. As we heard from both Rella and Mirele, what's the purpose of this evaluative activity? What information, what do they want to know? What do those audiences want or need to know? Importantly, as we heard from Jim, what are they going to do with that information once they have it, right? How will the information actually be used? Because if you can't answer that question, don't spend your precious resources on evaluation. You've got to have a clear sense of how you're going to use the information once it's been gathered. And the last one really goes to this question, I think, which is, what kinds of data are going to be seen as credible, reliable, and valid by those audiences? So different people have different interests in more narrative, more testimonial types of data, evaluative data. Those are certainly data, as Mirele and others have told us. Some people are interested in more quantitative data. If you have a smaller group of participants in a program, quantitative data don't always make sense because, if you have 20 people in a program and one person says something different, that's a 5 percentage point swing. So really thinking about those 4 questions, who needs to know, what do they want to know, how are they going to use the information once they have it, and lastly, what kinds of data are seen as credible, reliable, and valid to those different audiences. Those are 4 important questions I would suggest also thinking about when you're considering undertaking any evaluative activity. I'm going to turn it over to Meirav here, I think, for the last couple of minutes. And to wrap up any additional comments or questions here, to the panel or otherwise.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. A special thanks to Wendy for moderating, and to Rella and Mirele and Jim, and of course to our friends at the Jewish Communal Fund, Sue and Ellen and Michelle and Tamara behind the scenes. It was such a pleasure putting all of this together. I wanted to take a brief moment to speak a little bit about what JFN does, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar. We're a network of high net worth Jewish philanthropists. Our goal is to bring together folks who are interested in creating change through networks and connecting those people to each other and helping them to do the good that they want to do in groups, thereby expanding the Jewish communal field. And we have an annual conference every year. We have a conference every year. This year it's going to be in Atlanta from March 19th to 21st. If you're interested in joining us at that conference, please definitely be in touch with me or your friends at the Jewish Communal Fund. And we're really looking forward to seeing you there. We're going to have some really great programming talking about things like this and much beyond. We also have programming that happens throughout the year, webinars like this one, networking events that happen in person all over the country and all over the world. So we're really glad that you all were able to join us today. Again, many thanks to everyone who was on the call. Hope to see you at another program or at conference in March. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.